Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the most prestigious medical tower in Manhattan, casting golden beams across the polished marble floor. The air inside the private cardiology office carried a faint scent of eucalyptus and espresso, perfectly balanced between professionalism and warmth. Everything in that space, down to the brushed steel handles and the Italian leather chairs, was a statement of elegance. But no one embodied that quiet luxury more than Dr. Ethan Brooks. At 35, Ethan was more than just one of New York's most respected cardiologists. He was a man shaped by legacy, discipline, and an almost obsessive pursuit of excellence. His family name carried weight in elite circles, and though he rarely leaned on it, the Brooks lineage opened doors most people didn't even know existed. With broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored suit and calm, ocean-gray eyes that rarely revealed emotion, Ethan had grown used to the sterile rhythms of his routine: consultations, surgeries, lectures, and dinners he didn't enjoy. That morning, as he adjusted the cuff of his shirt and glanced down at the stream of yellow taxis threading through Fifth Avenue, he expected nothing new, nothing different, just another name on the list. But when the door opened and the nurse quietly announced the next patient, something shifted. "Miss Emily Harper," the nurse said. The name was unfamiliar. Her file had minimal information. 26 years old, referred by a small-town general practitioner in Springfield, complaints of palpitations, fatigue, and occasional dizziness. Ethan barely lifted his gaze until she stepped inside. She entered like someone trying not to be noticed. Small frame, pale complexion, a simple cardigan, a size too big, and an old canvas tote pressed tightly against her chest. Her eyes were large and hesitant, the kind that looked like they belonged to someone who had spent a lifetime apologizing for taking up space. "Good morning, Emily," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. Her eyes flinched at the sound of her name, and for a moment, she didn't move. Then, as if remembering how to exist in the world, she nodded quickly and sat, her fingers nervously knotting the hem of her sleeve. He opened her file again, buying time. "I see you've been experiencing some irregular heartbeats." She nodded once, then spoke so softly he had to lean in. "Yes, I think so. It feels like my heart's racing sometimes, especially around people. Do you feel any chest pain?" "No," she whispered. He studied her, not in the clinical way he usually did. There was a tremor beneath her voice that had nothing to do with arrhythmia. She didn't meet his eyes, not even once. "Any history of medical conditions, surgeries, previous hospitalizations?" She shook her head, still avoiding his gaze. "All right, I'll run a few tests to rule out anything physical. For now, I'd like to listen to your heart. Would that be all right?" At that, Emily froze completely. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands turned visibly cold and clammy. Ethan paused, lowering his stethoscope without touching her. "I won't proceed unless you're comfortable." Her lips parted as if to explain something, then shut again. A blush climbed up her neck, coloring her cheeks with silent shame. Then, with a voice that sounded like a fragile thread, she muttered, "I've never been touched, not like this." Ethan's brows drew together, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. She added quickly, her words stumbling over one another, "I mean, not by a man or anyone. Really, I've never had a checkup like this before, not even when I was a kid." I avoided it. He straightened, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Most patients came in with their defenses up, but Emily wasn't defensive. She was exposed. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's slow down. You're safe here, all right?" She looked up then, just a flicker, and he saw it. A lifetime of fear, trapped behind quiet eyes. Something inside him shifted, subtly but irreversibly. "I'll guide you through every step," he continued. "You can stop me at any moment. Deal?" She hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. When he finally placed the stethoscope near her collarbone, she flinched, but didn't pull away. Her heart, ironically, was racing so fast he could barely get a steady rhythm. Ethan's hands were steady, but his thoughts weren't. He treated CEOs, celebrities, even heads of state, but never someone like her. Never someone whose vulnerability wasn't performative but real, raw. When the exam was done, she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "So did he?" Ethan sat down, removing his gloves, suddenly aware of the silence stretching between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. He could feel something lingering in the air, not attraction, not yet, but something rarer. A question, a door half open, and he had no idea what would happen if he stepped through. After Emily left the consultation room, Ethan remained still for a moment, longer than usual, staring at the closed door. There was something in the way she had clutched her bag, in the way her eyes darted around the room like a deer in unfamiliar woods. It wasn't just medical. It was human and deeply personal. When she returned the next day, as scheduled, for her cardiac monitoring and initial tests, Ethan was waiting with a composed but attentive demeanor. He had arranged for the nurse to remain nearby, just in case Emily felt uncomfortable again. But she came alone, on time, quiet as ever, with her cardigan sleeves pulled over her hands like a child clinging to a safety blanket. "Good to see you again, Emily," he greeted gently, standing to shake her hand. She nodded, didn't speak. Her fingers barely brushed his before retreating, as if even that touch had taken all her courage. He invited her to sit, then began reviewing the notes from their previous session. "We'll do a full blood panel today and set you up with a 24-hour Holter monitor. But before that, I'd like to listen to your heart again. You did really well last time." Emily nodded again, tighter this time. As he approached, her breathing quickened, not the shallow kind that came from mild nervousness. This was deeper. Her chest rose and fell too rapidly, and when he raised the stethoscope once more, her arms involuntarily crossed over her chest, shielding herself. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, lowering his hands again. "We don't have to rush." Emily swallowed hard, and for the first time, she tried to speak. I don't know why this is so hard." Ethan crouched slightly, bringing himself to her eye level, but maintaining a safe distance, because somewhere along the way, someone taught you that being touched meant being in danger. Her eyes widened. "I've worked with trauma patients before." He continued gently, "You're not broken, but your body remembers things, even when your mind tries to stay quiet about them." "I've never been hurt," she said quickly, as if needing to clear herself of suspicion. "Not like that." "I believe you," he answered immediately. "But trauma doesn't always look like what we see in movies. It can be years of silence, neglect, isolation, or even just never being shown that the world can be safe." Her lips trembled. A part of her wanted to run, but another part, a quieter, braver part, wanted to stay, to understand why her heart reacted like this, why being in the same room as a kind man made her pulse explode. Ethan waited, gave her space, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small mirror. "Here," he said, handing it to her. She looked at him, confused. "Watch your own face," he said gently, "just for a moment, while I place the stethoscope. That way, you'll see that you're okay, that no one's hurting you." Tentatively, she took the mirror. Her hands shook as she held it, and when Ethan finally placed the stethoscope again slowly, respectfully, she watched herself breathe through the fear. Her reflection didn't show panic. It showed a girl trying. He could hear her heartbeat, loud and clear. Too fast, but not irregular. "You're healthy," he said finally. "But there's more going on here than just your heart." Emily lowered the mirror. Her eyes were glassy now. "I thought I was dying," she whispered. "When it started happening, my chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe. I thought maybe something was wrong inside me." "There is," Ethan said carefully, "but not in the way you think." He sat down again and began to explain the results of her physical evaluation, the blood work that was already back, and why her heart was reacting more to her emotions than to any underlying condition. "It's called social anxiety," he explained. "Severe in your case, but not uncommon and very treatable." Emily looked at him like he had just handed her a map in the middle of a storm. "You mean I'm not crazy?" "Not even close," he said with a soft smile. "You're human and overwhelmed. That's not weakness, Emily. That's a signal your body's asking for help." Her shoulders dropped slightly, and for the first time, she exhaled without trembling. "Thank you," she murmured, still avoiding eye contact, but less guarded now. Ethan handed her a referral for further exams, but also scribbled a name on a separate card. "This is a colleague of mine, a psychologist I trust. If you ever feel ready." She works remotely, too. You can start small. Emily stared at the card as though it were written in another language. "I don't know if I can talk to someone," she admitted. "You already are," Ethan replied, standing to see her out. "And you're doing better than you think." As she turned to leave, her tote bag slung over her shoulder, Ethan found himself watching the door close again. Only this time, not with detachment. There was something about her, not just the vulnerability, but the strength it took to show up anyway. and for reasons he couldn't explain, her silence lingered in his mind longer than any case he'd handled this year. It wasn't until Emily returned to the clinic a week later, this time for a follow-up after her Holter test, that Ethan realized how much he had been thinking about her more than just a passing patient, more than a clinical curiosity. Her presence, quiet yet undeniably heavy, had rooted itself somewhere beneath his skin. He wasn't sure what that meant. Not yet. But he knew he didn't want her to fade back into the silence she seemed to live in. She arrived early, sat still in the waiting room, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed on the tiled floor. No phone, no distractions. Just her and the loud hum of the world she didn't know how to belong to. When the nurse called her in, Ethan met her with a small nod and a warmer smile than usual. "Hi, Emily." She returned the nod but didn't smile. Inside his office, she sat in the same chair, posture slightly less tense than before, but only slightly. He reviewed her results first. "Your Holter was clean, no arrhythmias, your heart's perfectly healthy." Emily blinked, then looked down. "You sound disappointed," he observed. "No," she said softly. "I just thought maybe if something was wrong, there'd be a reason I feel like this all the time." Ethan leaned back, curious. "Like what?" Emily hesitated, then began speaking in fragments, sentences with frayed edges. "I get dizzy sometimes around people. My hands sweat, and I can't speak properly. I avoid grocery stores, crowds. I've never been on a plane or a train. I walk almost everywhere unless I'm with my neighbor. I don't do well outside." She looked up then, her eyes filled with something raw. "I've been like this for years." Ethan waited. Let her speak at her own pace. "My parents died in a car crash when I was 14, she said, voice suddenly flat. "After that, I moved in with my grandmother, Eleanor. She lives in Springfield, a small town. Not much happens there. People notice when you're different." He listened without interrupting. Every detail was a thread. "I didn't go to college. I finished school at home, online. I take care of my grandmother now. She's all I have." "What about friends?" Ethan asked gently. Emily gave a small, broken laugh. "I don't think I ever really had one. Not a real one. People at school said I was weird, too quiet, too jumpy. I always felt like I didn't belong." Ethan's throat tightened at the quiet certainty in her tone. "I work from home," she continued. "I embroider tablecloths for a small shop in town. I make enough to help with groceries and medicine for my grandma. And that's my life." Her voice trailed off. There was no bitterness in it, just fact, as if she'd accepted a half-life as her only option. "You don't leave Springfield often?" he asked. She shook her head. "This is the first time I've been to the city. I took a bus. I almost didn't come. I had a panic attack at the terminal. Slept at the station because I couldn't bring myself to ask anyone for help." Ethan froze. "You slept at the terminal?" Emily nodded, as if it were normal. "Emily." His voice softened, but it carried a weight. "You should have told someone. I didn't know who to tell. I didn't want to bother anyone. You already have so much to do." Something inside Ethan stirred not pity, something deeper, a protective impulse he hadn't felt in years. "You're not a bother," he said firmly. "Ever." The room grew quiet again, a silence that didn't feel empty but full. She looked at him then, fully. For the first time, their eyes met, and Ethan saw it. The years of invisibility, the constant internal whisper that she didn't matter, that her needs were too loud, that her existence was too much. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on the desk. "You know," he said, "when I was in med school, I had a professor who used to say that some illnesses don't show up in scans. Some live in the space between heartbeats, in the loneliness, in the silence." Emily blinked, her lips parting ever so slightly. "You've lived in that silence a long time, haven't you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ethan made a note on her chart, nothing medical. Just a reminder to himself. Talk to her again. Ask her about Springfield. Ask about the embroidery. Find a reason to keep the thread from snapping. He looked at her again. "Would you like some tea?" "I keep a stash for patients who aren't in a rush." She looked surprised by the offer. I don't know. I've never stayed in a doctor's office just to talk." "Well," he said with a soft smile, "there's a first time for everything, and maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something neither of them had expected." That evening, long after Emily had left his office, Ethan found himself sitting at his desk, staring at the screen with her chart open but untouched. He wasn't reviewing test results. Those were already done. He wasn't prescribing medication. there was none to prescribe. What he was doing, though he wouldn't yet admit it aloud, was wondering how someone so young could carry so much invisible weight and how no one had ever truly seen it before. The next morning, Ethan reviewed her blood work again. Out of habit more than necessity, everything was pristine. Levels perfect, no signs of anemia or thyroid irregularities. Her heart rate had stabilized over the course of her Holter monitoring, revealing no arrhythmias, no physical explanation for the palpitations or dizziness. Medically speaking, Emily Harper was healthy. Emotionally, she was unraveling. He sat back, exhaled through his nose, and clicked the pen in his hand twice before standing. That invisible ache inside her, that quiet war, wasn't something he could diagnose with instruments. It required something far less precise and infinitely more complex. Presence. Empathy. Time. When Emily returned later that week for the follow-up appointment, she looked a little less like a ghost and a little more like a question mark, unsure, searching, but present, and that mattered. He offered a smile. "How have you been feeling since we last spoke?" She shrugged, eyes glued to the floor. "Tired, but I think that's just life." Ethan gestured for her to sit and opened his notebook instead of the medical file. "Emily, I want to talk to you today, not as a doctor, but as someone who sees you, really sees you." She stiffened slightly but didn't pull away. "I reviewed all your tests. Physically, you're doing well. Your heart is strong. But based on everything you've told me, the panic attacks, the avoidance, the exhaustion, what you're experiencing is not physical, it's emotional. And it's very real." She looked up at him cautiously. "I believe you're living with severe social anxiety," he said gently. "It's not something you caused, and it's not a flaw, but it affects the way you move through the world." Emily's throat tightened. "Is that like a mental illness?" Ethan shook his head. "It's a condition. One that many people deal with. And like any condition, it can be managed, even healed, with support, tools, and time." She stared at her hands. "But I'm not like other people," she whispered. "I can't even sit in a room with strangers without feeling like I'm disappearing." "That's not your fault," he said firmly. "You adapted to survive. You made your world smaller so it wouldn't hurt so much." She looked up at him again, something fragile breaking open behind her eyes. "I thought maybe I had something wrong in my chest," she murmured, "that my heart was broken somehow." Ethan tilted his head, voice quiet. "Your heart's fine, Emily. It's your soul that's been holding its breath for too long." Silence fell between them, heavy but not sharp. He waited, giving her space to absorb the words. Then, reaching into his drawer, Ethan pulled out a slim, hand-bound booklet, one he gave only to patients he felt might benefit. Inside were simple techniques, grounding exercises, breathing practices, a few thoughts on reclaiming safety in small ways. "This isn't a cure," he said as he handed it to her, "but it's a place to start." She took it with both hands, as if it were something sacred. "Most people wouldn't care this much," she whispered. Ethan smiled softly. "Then most people don't know what they're missing." Emily lowered her gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something different in her eyes, not fear, not shame, but curiosity, a desire to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone in this world as she thought. "I'm not good at therapy," she admitted. "I tried once, years ago. I couldn't speak." "That's okay," Ethan replied. "It doesn't have to start with speaking. Sometimes healing starts with someone just being there." A long pause stretched between them. She reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her movements delicate. "What if I never get better?" she asked suddenly, voice breaking. Ethan's eyes softened. "Then we'll keep showing up, again and again, until you start to believe that better doesn't mean perfect. It just means not being alone in it anymore." She blinked fast, trying to keep the tears from falling, and nodded once. And as she stood to leave, still holding the booklet close, she paused at the door, turned back, and whispered something that caught him completely off guard. "Thank you for not giving up before even trying." And then she was gone again. But this time, her absence didn't feel like disappearance. It felt like promise. That night, Ethan lay awake longer than usual, his mind replaying pieces of Emily's voice, her hesitation, the way her fingers curled tightly around the booklet he gave her. He had seen thousands of patients in his career, some grateful, some indifferent, but none had lingered in his thoughts like she did. None had made him question the limits of what professional was supposed to mean. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something more delicate than that. More dangerous, a quiet pull that felt like the start of something sacred. He had seen resilience before, but Emily's resilience was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rebellious. It was made of soft silences and small steps, of waking up every day to a life that barely noticed her, and still choosing to live it with dignity. He didn't want her to disappear again, and so, against his usual instincts, he made a decision he rarely allowed himself. He crossed a line. The next morning, Ethan called the front desk to locate her number, not her emergency contact, not her medical record, but her direct line. He didn't ask permission. He didn't script what he was going to say. He just picked up the phone and dialed. The line rang twice before a small, almost startled voice answered. "Hello? Hi, Emily. It's Doc Brooks. I hope I'm not calling it a bad time." A beat of silence. "No, it's okay. Is something wrong?" "No, not at all." He exhaled, adjusting his tone. "I just wanted to check in. I know I usually don't call patients like this, but after our last session, I found myself thinking about what you said, about how isolated things have been." He could hear the hesitation in her breath. "I know this city can be overwhelming. And I know you've been handling everything on your own for a long time. I just wanted you to know that someone's here. That I'm here. If you need someone to talk to." There was a pause, soft, weighted. No one's ever said that to me before. Ethan felt something crack open quietly in his chest. "I meant it." Another long pause. "I didn't know if I should reach out," she said quietly. "You're a doctor. I thought maybe you'd think I was." "I don't know, Needy." Ethan smiled. "Emily, everyone needs someone. That's not weakness. That's being human." He heard the faint sound of her swallowing. Then her voice, even softer than before. "I didn't think people like you noticed people like me." His throat tightened. "People like me don't forget people like you." A silence settled between them again, but it wasn't empty. It was warm, grounded. They spoke for 20 more minutes, nothing deep, just simple things. How her grandmother was doing that day. What the weather was like in Springfield. How her embroidery orders were stacking up. She told him she liked cloudy days more than sunny ones. He told her he preferred silence to noise. Somehow, without even trying, they kept finding each other in the small spaces between words. Before ending the call, he asked gently, "Do you have a therapist close to home? Someone you could see in person?" Emily hesitated. "There's no one nearby." I looked. "The closest is 2 towns away, and I can't leave my grandmother for that long." Ethan made a mental note. "Would you mind if I helped you find someone local and experienced?" "You do that?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes," he said simply, "because you matter, Emily." The line went quiet again then. "Okay." He smiled. "I'll call you once I have someone I trust." She murmured a soft thank you, and they hung up. But the moment stayed with him. Later that week, he followed through. He called a psychologist he knew from residency, someone who had transitioned to a quieter practice near Springfield, compassionate, skilled, and deeply human, just like Emily needed. Once the details were arranged, Ethan called her again. "I found someone," he said. "Her name is Dr. Clara Evans. She specializes in social anxiety and trauma recovery. She works just 15 minutes from your house." Emily was speechless. Then, after a long breath, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just try." She agreed, reluctantly but sincerely. Then, just as he was about to end the call, he said something that surprised even himself. "Emily, would you like to have coffee with me sometime?" The silence that followed was long, but it wasn't rejection. It was disbelief. "You mean outside the hospital?" "Yes," he said, voice warm. "Just 2 people, not a doctor and a patient. Just you and me." She didn't answer right away. He imagined her gripping the phone, staring at the wall, heart racing. "I've never done that before," she said. "I know," he replied gently. "But there's a first time for everything." Another pause. "Okay," she whispered. "But I'm scared." "I'll meet you wherever you feel safe," he promised, "and we'll take it slow." It wasn't a date. It was a door. And Emily, with trembling fingers, chose to open it. Ethan had planned to meet Emily at a modest cafe on the outskirts of Springfield, one that served both tea and comfort in equal measure. It wasn't a chain, but a quiet little place with wooden shelves full of donated books, ceramic mugs that didn't match, and windows that let the sun pour in like honey. It felt like the kind of space where nothing needed to be perfect, only sincere. He arrived a few minutes early, just to make sure the place wasn't crowded. When Emily stepped in 10 minutes later, she paused at the doorway, as if the threshold between inside and outside had never felt more terrifying. Ethan stood immediately and gave a soft nod. "You found it," she nodded back, clutching a small cloth pouch in both hands, her eyes darting nervously to the few scattered customers. "I asked the owner to reserve a quiet table," he said, leading her to a small nook in the back near the window, where the light touched her face in a way that made her look like she belonged in a painting. Emily sat down slowly. Her fingers fidgeted with the pouch, which Ethan realized was handmade, embroidered with tiny blue flowers. It was beautiful in a humble, imperfect way. "Like her. Did you make that?" he asked, nodding toward the pouch. She looked at it, then at him. "Yes, I do that when I'm nervous." He smiled. "You must make a lot of beautiful things." Her cheeks turned pink, but she didn't hide. For the first few minutes, their conversation danced awkwardly around weather and local news. Emily sipped chamomile tea, as if it might betray her. Ethan, sensing her discomfort, didn't rush her. Instead, he asked about the birds on the windowsill sparrows, and that small gesture opened something in her. "I like birds," she said softly. "They're simple. They just are. They don't overthink where to land, or who's watching." Ethan leaned in, listening more with his silence than with his words. "Back home, there's a fig tree near our kitchen window. Every morning, robins come and peck at the fruit. I've started naming them. Do they have personalities?" She smiled. "One of them's bold, steals the biggest pieces. The others wait their turn." It was a small moment, but something shifted. Her voice was steady now, gentle, yes, but not trembling. Ethan saw a version of her that hadn't had the chance to exist in the world. Curious, observant, full of wonder. "I don't talk like this with anyone," she admitted after a while. "I'm glad you're talking like this with me," Ethan replied. Her eyes searched his face, not for attraction, not yet, but for safety, for proof that his kindness wasn't a temporary performance. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Of course. Do you think there's something wrong with me?" The question hit him like a slow-moving wave. He put his cup down and answered without hesitation. "No. I think the world hasn't known how to handle someone like you, and instead of adjusting to meet you, it tried to convince you that you're the one who doesn't fit." Her lips parted slightly, eyes glossed with emotion. "You're not broken, Emily. You're just unprotected." And too many people confuse those two things. No one had ever said that to her, not her teachers, not the neighbors, not the quiet whispers of Springfield's small-town judgment. She stared out the window for a moment, blinking quickly. "I used to wish I could disappear," she said softly, "but now I think I just wanted someone to see me, really see me." "I see you," Ethan said. She looked back at him, and for the first time, didn't look away. For the next hour, they talked about things that didn't usually come up in conversations between strangers. The book she read at night, her fear of speaking in public, the one time she tried to attend a local town fair, but left before entering because the crowd felt too big. She told him about her grandmother's old stories, the way she learned to embroider watching YouTube videos, and how she sometimes imagined owning a small fabric shop filled with soft colors and even softer people. And at the end of it all, Ethan asked carefully, "Would you like to do this again?" Emily looked at her empty teacup. "I think I would." He smiled. "Same place, next Saturday?" She nodded. A quiet, gentle yes, and as she stood to leave, she paused again. Her fingers hesitated near her chest, where a tiny silver chain peeked out from under her sweater. "Thank you for listening," she said. "No one ever waits long enough for me to speak." Ethan's reply was simple. "I'd wait as long as it takes." As she walked away, he didn't see a girl who was broken. He saw a woman quietly learning to unfold, and he wondered, what would it feel like to be the first person she ever allowed to hold, or that she kept hidden? The following week, Ethan found himself checking his watch more than usual. It wasn't the kind of restlessness that came from stress or boredom. It was anticipation, and he hated admitting that, even to himself, he had told Emily they could meet again that Saturday. But when Saturday came and passed without a message, a call, or even a quiet confirmation, something inside him twisted. She wasn't the type to ignore someone. If she hadn't shown up, it meant something had happened. On Sunday afternoon, against his usual caution and the rules of emotional distance he was once so strict about, he texted her. "Hi, Emily. I just wanted to check in. Hope everything's okay. No pressure. Just thinking of you." The message stayed unread for 5 hours. Then, finally, 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I'm sorry I didn't come. My grandmother had a fall. She's okay now, but I've been scared. I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me. Ethan responded instantly. Of course I want to hear from you. I'm just glad she's okay. Do you need anything? No, just thank you. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about how fast Emily had pulled away. One small disruption, and she had assumed he would no longer care. It wasn't just her insecurity. It was the way her world had taught her not to expect anyone to stay. The next morning, he made another unorthodox decision. He called her. Hi, she said, her voice small and tired. Hey, I wanted to ask you something, he said. Okay. Would it be all right if I visited you in Springfield sometime? Just maybe to take a walk or talk in person again. He could almost hear her blinking through the phone. You'd come here? If you're comfortable. There was a pause. I don't have anywhere fancy to take you. There's a small bookstore cafe near the square. They know me there. Sometimes I go just to look at the covers. He smiled. Then that's where I'd like to meet you. They made a plan for the coming weekend. When he arrived in Springfield on Saturday, the first thing Ethan noticed was how still the town felt compared to the chaos of New York. This place was quiet, like a paused memory. The cafe Emily had mentioned was small, as promised. Inside, the shelves were crammed with second-hand novels. The walls smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper, and a single speaker played soft jazz that crackled slightly with age. She was already there when he arrived, waiting at a corner table, hair loosely braided, a worn book open in front of her. She looked up as he entered, her smile cautious but real. You came, she said. I told you I would. They ordered tea and talked for a while. This time, it was Emily who led the conversation. She told him about the neighbor who helped take care of her grandmother, how she'd learned to make apple pie from an old recipe book, and how her embroidery orders had picked up a little after a woman in town shared her work online. I've even been thinking, she added, eyes lighting for a brief second. Maybe I could sell my designs in a tiny booth at the farmer's market. Just sometimes. That's a beautiful idea, Ethan said. I could help if you'd like. She smiled, then hesitated. I don't want you to feel like you have to rescue me. I'm not rescuing you, he replied softly. I'm standing beside you. Her expression shifted. There was a pause, a hesitation at the edge of something unspoken. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Why are you doing all this? Spending time with me. Calling. Visiting. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he answered, not with logic but with truth. Because you make me feel like I'm not just going through the motions anymore. Emily blinked fast, her hands trembling slightly on the rim of her cup. I'm not used to meaning something to someone, she whispered. Well, get used to it, he replied with a gentle smile. Because I'm not going anywhere. After they left the cafe, Ethan offered to walk her home. It was only a few blocks, but the air was fresh, and the sun, soft, painting everything gold. As they reached the gate of her grandmother's house, Emily paused and turned toward him. I don't know what this is, she said honestly. I'm still afraid. Still trying to believe this is real. He stepped closer, but not too close. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for. I just want to know you, and if that means slow, then I'll match your pace. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with uncertainty and trust. Then, without warning, she reached for his hand. It was the first time she had initiated touch. Her fingers were cool, tentative. But she didn't let go. I'd like to try, she said. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. That's all I needed to hear. And in that quiet street, beneath the soft whisper of wind through the trees, something began. Not love, not yet, but the kind of hope that only grows when someone finally feels seen. The morning of their second meeting in Springfield felt different, lighter. Emily woke up before the sun rose, her hands already restless with anticipation. Her grandmother noticed as she made breakfast. You've been humming, Eleanor said, a sly smile hidden in her voice. Emily looked up, startled. I have? You haven't hummed in years. There was no teasing, only quiet acknowledgement. Emily blushed and shrugged it off, but inside, something warm bloomed. By noon, she stood in front of her modest wardrobe, choosing between 2 cardigans, one pale pink, the other sky blue. It wasn't vanity, it was care. She wanted to feel like the best version of herself, even if she wasn't quite sure what that looked like yet. Ethan, on the other hand, was already in Springfield, having arrived early and wandered into a small antique bookstore while waiting. He didn't want to seem too eager, but he was, and he didn't deny it. They met outside the same cafe. When Emily appeared from the other side of the square, Ethan's breath caught not because of how she looked, but because of how she carried herself. Still gentle, still cautious, but there was something different in her posture, not confidence, something braver. Willingness. "Hi," she said, smiling nervously. "Hi," he replied. "You look like yourself, and that's perfect." She laughed softly, lowering her gaze. They stepped inside, chose a table near the window again. And this time, Emily didn't sit with her back to the room. She sat where the light could touch her fully. Her eyes explored the menu while her fingers twitched restlessly against her teacup. "Would you like to try something new today?" Ethan asked. "I think so. How adventurous." She giggled, almost childlike. One step at a time. They ordered together. Lavender tea for her, black coffee for him, and 2 slices of warm cinnamon cake. As they ate, the conversation grew more relaxed, more spontaneous. Emily asked about his childhood, and Ethan confessed he was a serious kid who rarely broke the rules. "I can see that," she teased gently. "I've been told I was born wearing a tie." She laughed loudly this time, and for a moment, even she was surprised by the sound. Emily spoke of her love for classical literature, Bronte, Austen, Hardy, and how she often imagined entire stories in her head, but never wrote them down. "You should," Ethan said. "I'm afraid they won't be good enough." "Good enough for whom?" She looked down. "For anyone?" Ethan leaned closer. "If it's honest, it's already enough for you, and that's what matters." The conversation shifted, but his words stayed with her like a low melody. After finishing their drinks, they walked through the park nearby. It wasn't grand, just a trail of trees, benches, and a pond with 2 swan boats tethered to the dock. Emily paused beside the water. "I used to come here as a kid with my parents. We had picnics." Ethan watched her carefully. "Do you come here now?" "No. I stopped after they died. I didn't want to remember." He didn't press. Instead, he followed her lead. To his surprise, she turned to him and pointed toward the swan boats. "Would you go with me?" He blinked. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I want to remember something good here." They boarded the pedal boat, Emily gripping the handles tightly as the vessel rocked slightly. Ethan sat beside her, close enough to offer stability but far enough to respect her space. As they drifted, Emily relaxed little by little, the wind tousling her hair, her shoulders softening. "I've never done anything like this with someone," she said. "Not like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm allowed to be scared and still be here." Ethan's voice was quiet. "You are allowed. Always." She looked at him then, truly looked. Her heart raced. She could feel the beat in her ears, not from panic this time, but from something tender and terrifying. "I'm afraid I'll disappoint you," she confessed. "I won't be enough." He turned his body slightly toward her. "Emily, I'm not here for who I think you should be. I'm here for who you are." Her eyes brimmed, not with sadness but with a sense of being disarmed. And in the stillness of the lake, in that fragile moment when nothing moved but their breath, Emily whispered something barely audible. "I've never been kissed." Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He simply took a beat, and then another. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. Emily swallowed, trembling. "I think I want that." He leaned in slowly, giving her all the time in the world to change her mind. But she didn't. Their lips met in the quietest, kindest kiss either of them had ever known. It was a promise, not a possession. A beginning, not a demand. When they pulled apart, her eyes didn't lower this time, and Ethan, for the first time in years, felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long, long time: wonder. The week after their kiss on the lake, everything felt different. Emily walked through her days with a new kind of silence, not the heavy, isolating one that used to wrap around her like a cloak, but something gentler, like her thoughts were no longer weapons, but pages of a book slowly being written. For the first time in years, she caught herself smiling without reason. The robins outside the kitchen window chirped the same way they always had, but now their sound felt like music. Her world hadn't changed, but her inner landscape had begun to thaw. Ethan, too, felt the shift. At work, he found himself distracted in the best way. He stared at his phone between appointments, wondering if he should call her or give her space. He didn't want to overwhelm her, not after how gently their connection had begun to unfold, but just knowing she was out there, choosing to be braver each day, made his own life feel fuller, less mechanical. On Thursday afternoon, Emily called him. "I don't want to be a burden," she said immediately. "You're not," he replied, with the certainty of someone who had waited for the call all week. "What's on your mind?" There was a pause, Then she exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about the kiss." Ethan's heartbeat quickened, but he kept his voice calm. "Me too." Another pause. "I didn't expect it to feel so safe." Her voice trembled slightly. "I thought I'd panic, that it would feel like too much. But it didn't. It felt like I could finally breathe." Ethan let those words sink in, deeply moved. "Emily, that means more to me than you know. I've never told anyone this," she continued. "But I used to believe intimacy was something I wasn't made for, like I wasn't built for closeness. But now I wonder if maybe I just never felt safe enough to try." There was a silence between them, long and sacred. Then Ethan asked gently, "Would it help if I came by this weekend, just to see you? No plans, no pressure." "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." On Saturday afternoon, Ethan drove to Springfield. The weather was soft, the kind of mild breeze and golden sky that seemed to bless whatever lay beneath it. When he arrived at Emily's house, he saw her waiting on the porch, wearing a long knitted sweater and holding 2 mugs. "I made hot chocolate," she said with a smile that shook ever so slightly. They sat on the porch steps together, sipping slowly, not saying much at first. Sometimes, presence was enough, but eventually, as the sky turned a deeper orange, Emily spoke. "My grandmother's away this weekend, visiting a cousin. She insisted I stay home and rest." Ethan nodded. "You deserve rest." She looked at him, her eyes calm but with something shimmering just beneath the surface. An invitation, a decision. "Would you stay for dinner?" she asked. "I'd love to." Inside, her home was small but filled with warmth. Crocheted blankets draped over armchairs, framed embroidery on the walls, a faint smell of cinnamon and rosemary lingering in the air. Emily moved slowly, like every movement was being measured not out of hesitation, but intention. Over dinner, they talked about small things. Books, dreams. Ethan shared about his late mother, and Emily listened with a kind of reverence he hadn't known he needed. Later, as they sat together on the couch, a silence fell between them. But this time it was full of tension, not fear. Something sweeter, heavier, brimming with unspoken longing. "I don't know how this works," she whispered. "Any of it, but I want to try." Ethan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then we'll try together." Her breath caught. She stood up slowly, then looked back at him. "Will you come with me?" He followed her into her room, heart pounding. Inside, the air felt sacred. Emily lit a small lavender candle on the nightstand, then sat on the edge of the bed, looking at him with equal parts fear and trust. "I'm not ready for everything," she said, "but I want to know what closeness feels like, not just physically, but emotionally." Ethan stepped closer. "We go at your pace, every step of the way." She reached for him first. Their embrace was slow, hesitant at first, then deeper. The weight of her head against his shoulder, the softness of his hand cradling hers. There was no urgency, no rush. Later, as they lay side by side, fully clothed, hearts aligned more than bodies, Emily turned to him and said something she had never said to anyone. "I think I love you." Ethan looked at her, eyes misted. "I know I love you," he whispered. She didn't cry, not this time, because for the first time in her life, she felt chosen. Sunday morning arrived with a quiet reverence. The first rays of sunlight peeked through the linen curtains of Emily's room, bathing everything in a soft golden glow. Ethan woke up first, careful not to move too quickly, not to disturb the peace that seemed to hang in the air like a blessing. Emily slept with one arm draped over his chest, her breath warm and steady, her hair slightly tousled, brushing against his jawline. For a long moment, Ethan simply watched her, not as a doctor, not even as a man in love, but as someone utterly in awe of the delicate strength resting beside him. He'd known intimacy in many forms before: fleeting, transactional, often wrapped in layers of performance, but this was different. What they'd shared the night before wasn't physical in the way most would expect. It was emotional, sacred, a surrender of walls instead of clothes. When Emily stirred, she blinked up at him, confusion fading quickly into something gentler, something she wasn't used to yet. "Comfort." "Morning," he whispered. She smiled sleepily. "You're still here. I told you I would be." They shared breakfast at the small kitchen table. Ethan offered to help, but Emily insisted on preparing everything. Toast with homemade fig jam, scrambled eggs, and slices of fresh apples sprinkled with cinnamon. It was simple, yet it felt ceremonial. As they cleared the dishes, a knock on the front door startled them both. Emily froze. "It's too early for visitors," she murmured. When she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. "Grandma." Eleanor stood there with a travel bag in one hand and a sharp gaze in the other. I took the early train. Didn't like the food where I was, she said flatly, stepping past Emily and into the house. Emily followed, heart pounding. Ethan stood up in the living room, uncertain of what to do with his hands. He offered a polite nod. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Ethan." Eleanor turned slowly toward him, sizing him up with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. "I know who you are," she said. Emily moved quickly. "Grandma, I invited him. Please don't be upset." Eleanor turned to her granddaughter, then glanced back at Ethan. "You're the doctor, aren't you? The one from New York?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm a cardiologist," she muttered. "But it's not her heart you've been fixing, is it?" Ethan didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. It's her spirit, and I'm not fixing it. I'm just being here." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eleanor stepped closer to Emily and placed a hand on her cheek. "You look different," she said softly. "Softer, lighter." Emily's throat tightened. "Is that bad?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "It's long overdue." Then she turned back to Ethan, her voice steady. "She's all I have left. If you hurt her, I'll know, and I'll find you." Ethan nodded with deep sincerity. "You don't need to worry. I'm not here to take her away. I'm here to walk beside her, wherever she chooses to go." Eleanor studied him a moment longer. Then finally, her shoulders relaxed. "Well then," she said, "I suppose you'd better stay for lunch." That afternoon, the three of them sat around the same table, sharing food, laughter, and stories. Ethan listened more than he spoke, allowing Eleanor to reclaim her space in Emily's life. And Emily, sitting between them, felt something she hadn't felt since childhood. Family. Later, as Eleanor napped on the porch swing, Emily and Ethan wandered into the garden behind the house. The fig tree stood tall near the back fence, its leaves rustling in the breeze. "I used to sit here after school," she said. "Pretend the world ended at that fence." Ethan stood behind her, hands gently resting on her shoulders. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she whispered. "I wonder what might be beyond it." He leaned down, brushing a kiss against her temple. "Whatever it is, I hope I get to see it with you." She turned to face him, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "You already are." Their bond, once tentative, now pulsed with something steady, not fast, not dramatic, just deeply real. And as the sun dipped behind the hills of Springfield, neither of them said the words out loud, but both of them knew. This was no longer a beginning. It was becoming something lasting. The following weekend, Emily did something she never imagined herself capable of. She invited Ethan to stay the night, not by accident, not out of circumstance, but by choice. It wasn't impulsive. It was a quiet, thoughtful decision made after several long walks through the garden. After hours spent writing down her thoughts in a worn notebook she'd never shown anyone. It was about trust, about surrendering the last, most delicate wall she had kept between them. Ethan arrived just after sunset, carrying a small overnight bag and a bouquet of dried lavender, not because he thought she expected flowers, but because he remembered her once saying the scent made her feel calm. That was Ethan's way, never too much, never too fast, but always intentional. Inside, the house was warm, lit by the soft glow of vintage lamps and the flicker of a single candle on the kitchen table. Emily had cooked a simple dinner: roasted vegetables, warm bread, and tea. She wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to create safety. "I'm nervous," she admitted, handing him a plate. Ethan took it gently. "So am I." That made her smile. After dinner, they sat on the couch for hours, not speaking much, just letting the silence stretch between them like a thread woven from patience and possibility. Eventually, Emily stood. "My room is ready, if you'd like to come in." Ethan stood too. "Only if you're sure." She nodded. "I want this not just the moment, but what it means." Inside her bedroom, the air was laced with lavender and quiet. The bed was neatly made, a soft cream quilt stretched over it. Everything felt sacred, like a chapel built not of stone but of vulnerability. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her fingers tangled in her lap. "I've never done this before," she said softly. "Not just physically, but emotionally. Letting someone see me." Ethan knelt before her, gently removing her shoes as if honoring a ritual. "You don't have to perform," he said. "Not for me, not ever." Her eyes filled with tears. "I spent so many years thinking I'd never be enough, that if someone ever got this close, they'd realize how empty I really am." He lifted his gaze, eyes steady. "Emily, you're full of life. You just never had a place to pour it." She reached for his hand. What if I mess up? What if I get scared halfway through? Then we stop. We breathe. We stay in whatever place feels safe. There's no destination tonight, just us. It wasn't about undressing. It was about unfolding. They lay down side by side, fully clothed at first, hands exploring in slow circles, fingers tracing shoulders, collarbones, jawlines. Emily's breath hitched each time she felt something new. The roughness of his palm, the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his heartbeat. And when she was ready, truly ready, she whispered one word that meant everything. Yes. What followed wasn't perfect. It wasn't choreographed, but it was real. There were moments when Emily pulled back and cried without knowing why. Moments when Ethan simply held her, whispering that she was doing beautifully. Moments when they laughed at the awkwardness, when their hands tangled or their foreheads bumped, but none of that broke the magic. If anything, it made it more human, more honest. Afterwards, they remained entangled beneath the quilt, her head resting over his heart, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine like a lullaby. I didn't know I could feel this safe, she whispered. You've always deserved it, he said. She looked up at him then, hair messy, eyes wide and glassy. I love you. Ethan cupped her face, kissed her gently. I love you, Emily, more than I thought I ever could love someone. Outside, the night was still. Inside, two hearts, once strangers, now beat to the same rhythm, slow, steady, sacred. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable began to take root in Emily's life. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen all at once. It was quiet, like the slow shift of seasons. But it was undeniable. She began waking up with purpose, not urgency, not fear purpose. Her embroidery work, once a way to hide from the world, became a bridge to it. Orders picked up after a small online store featured her delicate, hand-stitched designs. Local women started asking for lessons, and for the first time, Emily didn't say no. Instead, she said, maybe. Ethan continued his visits to Springfield every weekend, trading his marble floors and high-rise office for the worn wood of Emily's porch and the creaky gate that squealed like it was laughing. He started to leave a toothbrush in her bathroom. She started to keep his favorite coffee stocked in her pantry. Neither of them said it, but both of them knew. Their lives were no longer separate chapters. They were the same story now. Every night, they spoke on the phone before bed, sometimes for hours, sometimes just long enough to say, I'm still here. And that was enough. One afternoon, Ethan arrived in Springfield with a surprise. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. Emily, brushing flour off her hands from baking, tilted her head. What is it? He handed her a small, folded sketch. She opened it carefully and gasped. It was a blueprint, a tiny shop front, wide windows, shelves, a sign above the door that read, the stitching room. Her fingers trembled. Is this? I know a space in town, Ethan said. It's been vacant for months. I spoke to the owner. The rent's reasonable. I thought, maybe, if you ever wanted to try, this could be a place, your place. She looked up at him, heart pounding. I can't afford. You're not a charity project, Emily, he interrupted softly. I'm not giving this to you. I'm investing in something I believe in someone I believe in. She clutched the paper to her chest. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll think about it. She did more than think. Over the next few days, she visited the space, walked its empty floors, imagined the tables, the soft music, the women who would come to stitch not just fabric, but pieces of themselves back together, and eventually, she said yes. With Ethan's help, they painted the walls a pale lavender. They brought in shelves, spools of thread, baskets of fabric. Eleanor, still skeptical of city boys but now visibly fond of Ethan, contributed lace curtains and a stern warning to not let her granddaughter work herself to death. On opening day, Emily stood behind the counter, wearing a handmade dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers Ethan had picked from the hill behind her house. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't, and when the first customer walked in, a teenage girl with shy eyes and bitten nails, Emily smiled and said, "Welcome." Later that night, Emily and Ethan sat beneath the fig tree, watching the stars blink into view. I never thought I'd have this, she said, a life that feels like mine. Ethan took her hand. You didn't find it by accident. You created it one step, one word, one breath at a time. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you ever regret coming to Springfield? Not for a second, he said. You showed me something I didn't know I was missing. What's that? He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Stillness, truth, the kind of love that doesn't shout but stays. She kissed him then, slowly, like a thank you and a beginning all at once. As the wind stirred the leaves above them, Emily whispered into the night, "I'm not afraid anymore." Ethan held her tighter. "Then let's build something brave together." And from that quiet town, from that once frightened heart, a new kind of life was born. Not perfect, not loud, but profoundly and deeply real. Some hearts don't need healing. They just need to be heard for the first time. Emily believed love wasn't for her, that it was too invisible, too fragile, too shy. But it only took one man to see in her what no one had ever noticed for her to bloom, whole. And he, used to big conquests, discovered that the greatest one was earning the trust of a soul that trembled when touched. Because true love doesn't happen in a shout. It's born in silence, in that moment when someone chooses to stay, even when it would be easier to walk away.